This is going to be a little different from all the other sessions we have done so far because we're going to talk about a different product here. So this is our ambassador advisor, Ben Shear, performance specialist out of New Jersey, works with a bunch of high-level golfers, professional European Tour players, professional PGA Tour players, also works in a lot of other sports with a lot of other athletes, ice hockey. I know we've talked a lot about that. And I think your specialty is building workout programs, building golf swings related to the human's abilities to produce force. And I think that's really important. We need to know what capabilities our athlete has so we know what to train them in the gym and then what to put into their golf swings or what to remove from their golf swings. And training or understanding the human's capabilities is really important before we start to tell them to do anything. And I think our new product called Motion Catalyst, which we'll get into in a second, can really help us with that. Thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, so Motion Catalyst, if other people follow sports performance, there's a lot of companies out there trying to look at jumping off of force plates and different stuff like that. I was actually out last week on the European Tour, and they literally had plates, and they were measuring all the guys who missed the cut got to come in and get tested on force plates. And they're looking at all the different data related to club head speed and how they jump and how they land and all that type of stuff. So this is really the next frontier in what we're doing. And what makes Motion Catalyst so unique is most people are just measuring with vertical force only force plates. And we obviously, for the people who are using Swing Catalyst already, we have 3D forces, we have pressure, we have thermography, we have video, we have all of those things. And so as opposed to just looking at the forces of the jump from a quantitative perspective, we can look at video, how their feet are on the ground, how they're moving, and have a qualitative understanding of how they move as well. Because someone might just not jump very high or whatever, and they have terrible jumping technique. Or they're overpronating in their feet or supinating or whatever the case may be. And we can identify that with the 3D forces that we're seeing here. So it allows us to do a little bit of a better job, more detailed job than you would do just using a standard vertical only or 1D type of force plate. So Scott was presenting the other night at the open forum and talked about that a lot of speed was talked about and how people generate speed and create speed and all that kind of stuff. And one of the big things they talked about were braking forces, right? And braking forces are one of the ways we transfer energy up the chain. And we talk a lot about this kind of horizontal braking. And I think I talked about this a little bit last year as well. But you got to understand that horizontal braking as I move into the ball, does not necessarily mean that I'm pushing myself backward away from the target. The really good players actually use their vertical forces to create their lateral braking. So before we even get into the jumping, just to show, we have Drew's swing here. For people who don't know Drew, I think he can fly the ball about 380, 390 in the air. So he's got pretty good speed, I would say, right? And if we look at his swing here, if we look at his data, this is his horizontal force on the top part, and this is his vertical force. And we can see these peaks, right? You can see his peak vertical happens at the exact same time as his peak lateral braking. His peak vertical force happens at the exact same time as his lateral braking. So what does that mean? It means the vertical force we create is not massive, right? It's not like you're pushing yourself with all your might down the target line. So what they do is because those forces are lower and I'm moving this way, if I just create enough vertical, I can overwhelm that horizontal and just shut it off. And just basically create a braking mechanism from doing that. So you can see here how perfectly Drew does it. And if you look at any of the long drive guys, and even most good PGA Tour players, you will see this same exact thing. So if you're looking at your golfers, forget about doing Motion Catalyst, but if you're working with golfers and you're using a 3D force plate, you should be making sure that those things are lining up. They shouldn't be two separate elements. It's really one thing. And you'll often see that people do them as two pieces as opposed to one. So we're going to start with this concept that vertical is also braking your lateral, okay? So then what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at jumps, right? So Motion Catalyst is an athletic testing software system, and it's going to have all different from rate of force development, impulse momentum, all of these different types of things, eccentric braking, all that type of stuff. So what we're going to do is we just have people jump. And if people have listened to me speak before, I've done a thing called resistors and releasers. And that was looking at counter movement jumping versus squat jumping. And if people don't know the difference, a counter movement jump is where you go down before you go up. And a regular squat jump is you would go down, you hold that position, and then go up. And what we're trying to understand with that is how well a person uses elasticity. Right? So are they elastic or not? And then the resistor and releaser idea is somebody who's elastic wants to resist their pelvis in the backswing and create coil and stretch because they can use elasticity to generate speed. Someone who is not effective at using elasticity is going to be better releasing the pelvis, creating a longer hand path, and using kind of a longer runway to create their speed. So that's kind of your framework of it. But then within it, how you actually jump and how you actually create that motion is important from a training perspective, right? So I could say you're good at counter movement versus this or whatever. I don't really care which one you're good at. The question is, how do you actually create those jumps? And then what can I do as a trainer or a coach to help that person improve those skills?
Can you actually go through or name some players that would be resistors versus releasers? I think for people to understand, kind of a lot of us can picture,
Yeah, so if you look
PGA
at
Tour
someone
players.
like Rory, let's say, is a great example of someone who resists. He's obviously got a ton of trunk rotation. His pelvis doesn't whine that much on the backswing. He's really loading the muscles through his torso and creating that type of movement. Where if you looked at a Bubba Watson, let's say,
Phil
or
Mickelson.
Phil Mickelson, where the heel tends to come up, big giant winding, really long hand path. Often those guys have the club across the line, right? So if you have a longer runway, it gives you more opportunity to create speed. But guys who are elastic, JB Holmes, a Tony Finau, a Rory, right? They don't need long runways. They're like rubber bands. Those guys can snap back. But most of us are teaching 50-something-year-old business guys who sit behind a desk for 50 hours a week. Guess what? They're not too elastic, those guys, right? So we want to help them gain more speed. So number one is we can reduce their injury rate by getting them to release, increasing club hand path, number one. They'll get faster, and we also are not going to cause a lot of stress and torque into their spine and set them up for injury. With all of that being said, now we say, okay, we put you in our bucket. You're a resistor, you're a releaser, you are whatever you are, but then how do I be the best version of that within that context? So let's call somebody up here. Who wants to come jump? Ryan, come on up, bud.
Fusty.
So Ryan's another one of the Swing Catalyst ambassadors, great teacher. And what we're going to do here is, can you capture this, Drew?
Come on. Get a little stretched out here.
So we're just going to have him put his hands on his hips, and we're going to have him do a jump, and then we're going to take a look at his data, and we're going to try to understand what it really means. Okay? This guy's got some hops.
Subs.
Let's go. Okay? So one of the cool things in the fitness world is, we've started understanding and appreciating that the body is really important for the golf swing, but we typically more look at it from a mobility and stability perspective and all this stuff. Now we're getting a much deeper dive into what the human can and or cannot do. We'll let Drew mark us up here a little bit.
Key metrics, yeah.
Yeah, and can you just set the arrows so we can so the lines are in place, or are they auto in place now?
I don't know. It's a good question.
You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Okay, so he's just going to set our point. So understanding that there's possibly multiple phases of a jump. You have this unweighting phase, right, where you're dipping down, you're actually getting lighter. And if we think about in the golf swing, if you look at the biggest hitters, they tend to get up and high with their center of mass in the backswing, and then they drop it down. And that's the de-weighting part. And the lighter I can get, theoretically, when I then launch myself up, I should be able to launch myself higher. The heavier I stay, the less height I'm going to create and the less force I'm going to create. So we know there's a speed component of that as well. Not just how low you go down, how fast you can drop down into that position. The challenge with that is for a lot of people is when they drop down fast, is they can't create what we call muscle stiffness, the ability to break that force eccentrically and get stiff. So when they drop down, they're kind of like spongy at the bottom, and then they can't create that speed fast versus kind of like down and just pop, and they just hit the bottom and bounce off that bottom. So that's what we're looking for, this kind of muscle stiffness at the bottom. So if we look here at Ryan, are you good there, Drew? Are you good? Okay. So if we look at here, this is the unweighting phase, right? You can see here it says unweighting. So this initial line is his full body weight. What's his low weight here? 65%. So he basically de-weighted himself 38%, right? He made his body weight 38% lighter. And if you were going to jump, his legs didn't get weaker by making him lighter. So if he has to jump with less weight, that's probably a good thing, right? And you see guys who drop that number down significantly lower than that. But obviously, the more you can do within the context of a real golf swing, and the quicker you can do it, the more speed you're going to get. So we say, okay, if we look at his here, he kind of is at the bottom there for a long time, right? This is a time measure, right? So he's down there for a long time. And if we look at him, it's like he crushes down, and he's trying right now. This is what we call the braking phase. And the braking phase is that stiffness. Can you create enough stiffness to quickly change direction, right? And so now he's trying to go in his braking. Part of how he's braking is trying to actually propel himself now in the new direction. We call the propulsive phase, right? So if I'm trying to go up, it forces me to brake the down, right? So we can see here as he goes into his propulsive phase, which means now he's trying to actually move his center of mass back up. So he's here, he drops down, and now he's trying to go back up within his golf swing. He's trying to get in his propulsive phase here, and then ultimately you'll see the screen will go blank, right? And that's when he's obviously in the air. As we see him here, obviously there's no force going on there along the bottom. And then you'll see when he hits the ground, he'll get this big giant spike, boom, just like that. And so that's obviously got another element of braking force. And that braking force, and I didn't tell Ryan to stick it and really do anything hard, because I don't know where Ryan is in his training. And if I tell him, hey, stick it, maybe I'm going to blow him out. So I got to know who I'm dealing with if I'm going to say jump up and just slam on the brakes at the bottom. But if we looked at Ryan here, we can say, okay, well, that was pretty good. We could get jump height and all of those kind of metrics if we care about those things, right? But the problem with just looking at jump height, which is the most traditional way that people look at vertical force within the golf swing, like we want to see how high you can jump, is there's a lot of elements that go into why you jump high or you don't jump high, right? And a lot of it is your momentum right before takeoff, right? But for us, we might care more about the transition at the bottom than we do right at the top, right? So if I look at Ryan here and I go, okay, Ryan, whatever your jump height is, what do I like or what do I not like? Or then what can I do from a training perspective? What I don't like is we're really spongy and long in this down unweighting phase. He doesn't drop down quick and change direction quick. I would want to see his weight get lighter faster and his acceleration out of the hole faster, right? So it's more of a down up, right? Because he's there, and that's because maybe he doesn't have enough eccentric strength. Maybe he doesn't have enough braking force. And so when he's dropping down, it's taking him a bunch of time to kind of, I call it, get out of the hole, right? People watch any of my videos of my athletes, you hear me when they're doing jumping or certain exercises, you'll hear me yelling a lot, get out of the hole, right? So I want to get people to learn to get fast in this change, and I want to see this shape, instead of being this soft kind of U, get a little bit more V-shaped, right? So you drop down, you slam on the brakes instantly, and boom, now you're moving back up the chain. Yes.
Is it so that his pressure is more on his right foot? Could that change?
Well, we could put, like, you know what? You want to put up his...
Drew,
can you put up pressure and stance?
stop bugging our computer operator.
So yeah, here's another thing we were talking about in the beginning, that, of course, so we can look here. So if everybody knows, this is just showing the thermography of his feet, right? And we can see Ryan here, he's pretty symmetrical, right? 50, he gets a little bit, you can see him shifting to the right there. This is his right leg. He gets to 54% on his right, so he's got a little bit of a shift, right? I don't know, he's probably a right-handed dominant guy, which is also interesting because for most of us in the training world, if someone is right-hand dominant, they're usually left leg dominant, right? Because if I want to do my fine motor skills with my right hand, I tend to do all my strength stuff on the opposite side, right? If I was a basketball player and I'm going to jump up and take a layup, I'm going to jump off my left and do the fine motor control piece with my right. Or if I was going to kick a soccer ball, same thing, I would plant and do the strength work on my left and then kick it with my right. So we tend to, most people have what we call cross dominance. Okay, so interesting with him here. So obviously I don't have a physical screen on Ryan. I don't have anything. I just might be thinking, oh, do you have something going on in your left hip? Right? Maybe there's a physical reason why he doesn't want to load that hip as effectively as he could, right? So obviously we know there's an injury ahead of time. We're probably not having him doing a lot of jumping in the first place, but you might want to start thinking that. And you can just see it in the video. And this is what I'm saying, what makes Motion Catalyst way better than the other systems that are out there is you would never have that video to even see that. You would never have this data to see that, right? And you can see he's also at that bottom, he's got on his right side, even though he shifted over, he also has got a decent amount of pressure in his heel. Right, he's got nothing going on. Well, not nothing, but the red, the thermography, the red part is where the pressure is the highest, right? So you can see he's got a lot of pressure in his right heel all the way at the bottom of the thing, like he's squatting as an exercise versus jumping, right? Most people who are jumping and squatting are a little bit different mechanic than what we're trying to do. So from here, when he goes up, well, can we get, and then what you can see here, what Drew put up is we got a bunch of stuff. What's his contact time? How long was he in the air? His jump height, he jumped 12.95 inches. So we got to do some work there.
If you want to dunk, we got to do.
We have his eccentric rate of force development. Eccentric is the lengthening of the muscle. So when he's going down and he's dropping down, we're looking at how fast is he doing. Like I said earlier, the quicker you can drop down, the better, right? So we might say to him, maybe you're down slow because you don't have good braking at the bottom. And your brain knows that if you drop down faster, you're going to be in big trouble, right? And that you have to auto-regulate your system. And the brain is really smart. It's trying really hard not to hurt you. And most of us who get hurt often are disregarding the warning signs that are going on, right? And so we have all this stuff.
Drew has done some testing in NFL athletes, and that eccentric rate of force development can get up to 10,000, 11,000. So yours is 1,000. So you're 1/10 of NFL players in terms of
yeah, right. So we knew from the graph that number was going to be low.
Right.
Obviously, that number is low. His jump height is not super high. Right. So we want to say, okay, Ryan, and Ryan loves working with long drive people. Like that's his thing. If you follow Ryan on social media, man, everything he posts is about hitting it far. I mean, that's all day, all night. How far can we hit it? How far do my clients hit it? What are we doing to create speed, right? Like he's all about that. So if we were going to work with Ryan here, and he was my client, assuming we had a proper evaluation and we know that we're not going to do anything to hurt him, the first place I would start, and so the typical person who might just have his jump height and say, well, you jumped 13 inches, you stink, you're going to say, oh, we got to do more jump training. Or maybe you just need to lift more weights. You're not strong enough. Well, the reality is that's actually not going to help Ryan get that much better. That's not where his problem lies. You got to start at the first phase of the jump that goes bad, right? So it's an order, right? The jump is an order. Can you put the jump data back? The graph, sorry. The vertical axis, yep. So, right, so this is a timeline. So I want to know where's the first place things go bad? Because that's where I'm going to start my training, right? Because if something goes bad later, I don't know if that's really the issue or is that a byproduct of what happened before it. So for me, if I'm working with Ryan and he's my client, I'm like, man, we need to work on eccentric braking, right? And we talked about this as a braking force, right? He needs more eccentric braking. Well, what does that even mean? And what does that look like? And how do I train that in the gym? This is a low box here. This is a low thing here. Hop up on here, Ryan. Imagine this was a little bit higher, and I want you to step up, and just with a slight knee bend, I just want, like in a little quarter squat, I want you to stick it like glue. Right, and you can see he was even spongy with that. Right, did you see his butt kind of sag a little bit? When he hit the ground, do it again, no butt sag. A little bit better, and what did you see? He needed to stay higher though. He couldn't get as low, so which means he wouldn't have de-weighted as much, right? That's gonna limit his de-weighting if he can only do that high joint angles. If he can get lower, we can get lighter, and then he's gotta be able to get there. So the deeper he gets, so he could start with something like this. Okay, prove me that you can do it without sagging down and stick and ultimately work his way down. Flywheels is something that's become massive in the training world these last bunch of years. If no one's ever trained on a flywheel, you better start. But a flywheel uses inertia and it spins, and the more you give it concentrically or on the way up, the more it's gonna give you on the way down. And so it's moving at real time. And it's not like weight that you can kind of just sit there and go, okay, oh, time to go up. It goes down. If you don't slam on the brakes, it's going to suck you through the floor. And you better turn on the brakes on time and do it right, right? So I would love to see him doing some like flywheel squats And I know he has the flywheel squats. He did my mentorship, and I know he went out and bought one. So good man. But really focusing on the bottom. Actually, I would start with a light wheel, a high velocity drop down, braking hard and trying to get out of the hole as quick as I can. Not big load work on inertia. I would do a low load really quick. And I would say, let's get as light as we can, as low as we can, slow on the brakes, and come on up. So you could be doing depth jumps, flywheel type work, all of that type of stuff work. And what you might find is as he gets stronger for that, this little part of the graph drops down much quicker or faster. He can get much lighter. And then you're going to see his jump height go way up, but yet we didn't do any jumping. Right? I think we often see people who can't jump because all most people are measuring is how high can you jump. And while that's good-ish, I guess, right, that's not going to help you. I'll make a much faster change in his jump height in a matter of probably 2 weeks than most people doing jump training would take in a year. Because you got to understand where the problem is, not what the problem is, right? So then you have what's called this propulsive phase. And the propulsive phase is what happens after I brake, and I'm trying to get up, and how much force can I do going up, right? And then how fast can I apply that force as well, right? But if I wanted to, let's just say he was pretty good at the bottom, and he had good muscle stiffness, and he had all those stuff, and his propulsive phase wasn't good, so he's got great brakes, but he doesn't have any engine, right? Then if I'm going to train him in the gym, and I'm going to do explosive up stuff, I don't want him to use any type of counter movement in that training, meaning if I had him do a high pull or something like that, I would want him pulling it off of blocks or pulling it from somewhere where there's no dip down, right? I want him to feel like all you're trying to do is get going this way as fast as you can. I don't want to pre-stretch. I want to focus on the propulsive phase. So understanding that this thing here is what Drew is doing so incredible in his swing, where he literally in real time swinging, what's your club head speed? Yeah, 138, not bad. His swing? Yeah, you want to play your swing? Yeah. So he's got 138 club head speed, and what you see Drew at, right? So if you look at Drew's charts here, look how sharp that vertical force is, how high it is, and how tight it is. So, right, imagine this is time. So he's doing it in very little, he's creating massive force in very little time, right? And what do you de-weight down to in your swing?
$75.
So he's down to 75, and that's I wonder what is Kyle? Do you know what Kyle's D-weight number is? But probably bigger than that, because Drew actually doesn't go up as high as a lot of the guys. Like you watch some of the long drivers, like Bernie here works with Kyle Berkshire, like he's literally like up here and then whoom, and he drops it down hard and fast.
And this is a chippy one for Drew. And when you try to add speed, I imagine he gets more de-weighted.
Yeah, this is just swingy here at the show. You go out on the range with Drew, I bet you would see a much bigger, more severe change. So that's just chippy 138.
Yeah.
I mean,
why not?
not bad for a guy like that. So really the lesson I think from a golf application perspective is understanding that this de-weighting has to happen fast. You have to brake really hard before you create this acceleration, and that this vertical force is actually your lateral brakes, not pushing yourself this way and backward. It's this way, right? And so Drew obviously does that really well, but you can imagine if Ryan was now doing it, his vertical force line, you see how tight Drew's is or how fast it's happening, his would be a much wider looking graph. And I know you measure yourself. How much wider is your graph than that?
You got a little bunny slope.
It doesn't look like Drew's, right? So he won't be as high, and it'll be wider. So his force is lower, and the time it takes is longer. So the purpose of having this type of technology to do your training is that I can start breaking this stuff down. This is obviously, there's different people with different problems, and we can talk about all different stuff. And if anybody wants to ask questions at the end, we're just using the example of Ryan here. You'll see some people like this sharp is really steep. This gets really steep in here, and then this propulsive phase goes way up, right? I think Ryan has a room for opportunity in both of those places. But like I said, from a training perspective, I always want to start with what's the first thing that goes bad. Because it'll be interesting if you do what we're talking about to see, does your propulsive go up once you can just brake better and store that energy into the system and move it up? I think the answer would probably be, not that it maybe solve all your problems, but it'll definitely get better.
Right.
Right?
And I think what's really interesting too is most injuries happen in eccentric phases. So what we know from injury mechanism, like a baseball pitcher will never hurt himself from here to here. It's after the ball's gone that stuff goes wrong. And if he does get injured at any point and comes back, we can now measure, is your nervous system working the way it did before? Because that's something you can't see with your eye. You can't really test that. So having the ability, if you were able to produce 7,000 eccentric rate of force development before your injury and you come back and you're only 3, we're like, well, you're not ready to go back yet. And we need to do some more nervous system testing.
And I think there's one of the interesting things. Typically in training, we all want to teach our athletes when they jump to land soft and quiet. Plyometrics should be seen, not heard. These are famous words you hear in the strength and conditioning world. You know what that means? You're working on concentric force and you're not training the eccentrics at all. Again, if you follow me on social media and you ever see my hockey guys or anybody jumping,
it's loud.
They are loud and they stick it like glue. And we call them spongy ass. We're like, hey, no spongy ass. And I mean, they are jumping max effort, max. I mean, you can see for him here, jumping off of here to be stiff was hard. I mean, these guys are doing really ballistic stuff and it's like, bam, and they just lock it up. So not saying that you should do that with somebody who's not prepared, and there's a progression, obviously, that we need to go through to get there, but actually taking your jump training and having a real aggressive braking component to it is really, really important if you want to start moving these things up. And is rarely talked about. And I mean, I have some of my athletes that go back to their college teams and stuff like that, and they're doing their plyos as part of warm-up or whatever, and the coach is like, why do you stick it so aggressively? I'm like, well, you play hockey, you do have to change direction, and you got to brake, and you got to do these things. Like, why are we not working on it? Because to Scott's point is, that is where injuries occur, in this eccentric phase. We better start training these eccentric things. And the problem with traditional eccentric training is, it happens slow, right? We get a big bar and they're like, go down on a 6 count, and you're like 1, 2, 3. And that might build eccentric strength, but the problem is in sport, there's no time to that, right? The muscles need to fire on time. And when I need to brake right now. It doesn't matter that I can lower 7 million pounds and it takes me 8 seconds. Well, you know what? When I hit the ground, I got about 1/8 of a second. And if my brain can't switch that on right now, it's not going to do me any good. It doesn't matter. And that's what's so cool about the flywheel stuff, and or just doing it like the plyometric here, is like, it's happening at the speed of sport, right? People don't get hurt jump, they get hurt landing, right? People don't get hurt running, they get hurt braking. People, like Scott talked about with the arm, the decel components of the arms. All of those things are really important to what we're going to do. So we got to understand it's a progression, obviously, but ultimately, if we're trying to help people hit the ball as far as they can, we better work on these eccentric forces. We better work on braking. We better be aggressive with it. And obviously, we got to get there. But it's often no one wants to talk about this eccentric, high-intensity work.
I agree. And I think it's really important to do this throughout your life, too, because one of the biggest correlates of morbidity and mortality is falling.
Yeah.
And so if you're an older person and you trip and fall, if you can move slow, it's not going to help you, right? You got to move quickly, plant that foot, and eccentrically absorb that so you don't go down. And so being able to do this throughout your life, and even with your older golfers, doing a scaled down version of it can be really helpful for them to hit the ball farther, also for them to feel more stable. And
yeah, I mean, certainly what I did with Ryan, if you get somebody in their 50s who's, reasonably healthy, there's no reason they can't do that off of a 4-inch box and just work on braking. Like, there's no... obviously once you've done a little bit of base work with them, but there's no reason they can't start with that type of stuff. And then you go, okay, we were doing 4 inches, let's go to 6 inches. Or maybe we're going to get a flywheel and we're going to start with the little tiniest wheel we have. And then we're going to start building our way up, right? And I personally think if you're doing flywheels for this purpose, you actually don't want the heaviest wheels. Because you're really trying to manage the velocity of the movement much more so than the load. Right? I want to do it fast, and I want to do it now. And that load, still even with the small wheel, is way more than you're going to ever have in your golf swing. So it's not like it's not an quote overload relative to the golf action. You have a question?
Perfect. Questions? Yeah.
As you're training the improvement in these phases, how does it affect the synchronicity of the swing? Maybe this is a Bernie question. Trying to resynchronize everything at a faster rate.
Well, I think most people, if they can be faster, it's easy to regulate. It's hard when you're slow to try to be fast. If you're fast, it's easy to downregulate. Right? I can say, it's when a guy goes, give me an 80% swing. Hit me a 3/4 shot. Like, it's easy to downregulate. I think it's The problem is most people who have none of this stuff are trying to swing it fast, and they don't have the capacity to do it. And that's when the sequencing in the organization goes south, right?
And that's what a lot of people are talking about with speed training now, right? You go to over speed training so that your cruising speed now is higher than it used to be. Because it's always easy to downregulate, yeah. But if you don't have this gear up here, then and you're trying to get there.
Our goal in training is obviously to raise the ceiling.
Right.
And then we can decide how much of that we want to use. And then obviously your golf pro is going to get involved with, hey, at these speeds you can actually hit the fairway. At these speeds you can't hit the fairway. Like, and what do you want to do? Like, I have a tour player I work with now who we actually don't do speed training, because as soon as I increase his speed, and no matter what club fitters we've gone to see, his spin rate just keeps going up. So he plays golf at like 178, which is fast enough, so hence we don't need necessarily to do it. But if I get him up to 184 or 185, which he can do, spin rate goes up, accuracy goes down. As well, because of the spin rate going up, the ball actually doesn't go any further. And we've tried every combination you can imagine of clubs, and that's him. I mean, I've had other players we do the other way, and you can go up, but we can't find a combination that's better. And look, if you have 178, you're going to be fine. It's okay. Like, you can still play. But my point is, we don't even chase any of that anymore, because you got to play golf. And at the end of the day, it's about playing the game. But like we said, if we can raise your roof, then your ability to kind of find that zone where you can play well, and it's still high enough, just like him, right? Like 178's high enough. It's not super fast for the tour, but it's plenty fast for the tour. So he's in a good place where he can do that. So with everybody, relative to the level they want to play, what's high enough, right? You might want to be your club champion. You know, maybe you need 100 and, I don't know, 5-mile-an-hour club head speed or something, right? If you're at a good club, right? If you want to win some juniors event, maybe you need, high school age, maybe you need 110, 115, right? So it's all relative to where you want to be. You can be with a bunch of seniors that you're working with, and 85 or 80 might be their number. It doesn't matter. All of the information is still the same. You just regulate it relative to the objectives of the person you're working with.
Great question. Yep. Any other questions?
Yeah, I want to hear. French? Well, I don't know. I mean, I work with 2 professional French guys. I don't know any French. You mean like some of the companies that make them? What?
You have to see the piece of equipment. Maybe we'll show you a video of it after. We can load it up.
Yeah, we can we can go online and just go to one of the manufacturer
we'll
sites.
Show you what it is.
There's a lot of cool companies that's making this stuff. It's really becoming popular. There's a lot of people who have flywheels now and are training, and you can get ones that are boxes for doing squatting and all kinds of stuff, and you can get cables.
Right.
So there's kind of horizontal pulley systems and vertical pulley systems.
You just have to be very careful that people know what they're doing when they get on one of those, because somebody gets on it and comes up really fast, and then that thing just collapses them into the ground.
The first thing you teach them is that the rep ends at the bottom, not at the top. Right? Every other exercise we squat, we finish at the top. You finish at the bottom of the flywheel. If you stop here and that wheel changes direction,
that's gonna kill
bad things are gonna happen.
Yeah.
Right? So it ends when you're like, you put on those brakes hard.
Right.
And you slam it on and you stop the wheel.
Any other questions? Yeah.
To switch to motion catalyst mode, is that like an extra subscription, or is it automatically in the regular software?
Eventually, I believe our software will just be Motion Catalyst, and if you paid for the Motion Catalyst, you'll be able to use it. Golf will be under there. Baseball will be under there. So right now, it's just a separate software.
It's like cable, and it'll be like cable. I want to have HBO, and I want to have Showtime, and I want to have Cinemax, right? Like.
Right now, it's 2 separate software, so you'd have a Swing Catalyst and a Motion Catalyst on your computer, but soon it'll just be one thing.
Like
you can do golf on it.
I have the beta of it. I have Motion Catalyst, but I have baseball and golf and everything. And look, this is just, jumping is just one of us. And this is going to be, next year when we do this, all of this will be color-coded, and it'll be all very different. But on mine, right, and we're going to have, how many different tests do we have?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch. You can do balance testing for older adults. You can do IMTPs and...
mid-thigh pulls. We're going to have RSI testing, all kinds of other testing as part of it. We have like 12 or 15 tests, I think, that we have in our
and I think for like a junior academy, that would be awesome to track your athletes over time and really understand how their physiology is changing. Yeah,
but again, this is just a deeper dive into looking at how the body works, as opposed to just looking at mobility, stability type stuff or basic strength stuff, right? This is really going to directly correlate to club head speed, right? And we'll talk about a little deep for today, but like impulse momentum and stuff like that, which is really correlated to club head speed and other things.
Yeah.
But right away, Ryan can go home from this right now and have something he can start working on, right? And I'm sure if you follow, maybe he'll post some stuff on his social media
Shows you some
of him
flywheel
putting
stuff.
on the brakes. I'm going to hold you accountable, dude.
Yeah, and this is stuff that other athletes and other sports have been doing for a really long time. And now that golf is becoming much more of an athletic event, it's important to know the athletic capabilities of your golfers and how to train them appropriately. So
Yeah,
Ben,
and the one thing that everybody wants is more speed.
More speed.
I don't care who you train. I don't care how old they are. I don't care how young they are. You know, I have people come to me. They're like, "Oh, my back's blown out. Oh, my shoulder. I had 17 surgeries. But hey, can you help me hit it faster?" Right? I mean, that's everybody who works with golfers. Is whether you're an instructor or a trainer. That is the number one thing people want. Right? So if we're going to start going down those paths, if I just have you do a lot of jump training and you have no eccentric strength, eventually your joints are going to be very unhappy with you. Right? So developing it slowly and progressively over time and properly is going to reduce your risk of injuries and obviously increase your performance.
awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. That was awesome.